Okay guys, I'm going to be doing this off the top of my head and without a script, but I want to come on here and discuss something that when you look back on it about a year later, kind of makes you wonder, was that the original idea the whole time, or was what a lot of people suspected to be the actual legitimate idea, the real one that was supposed to happen, was the one that was supposed to become a reality? And I'm talking about the whole Grogar situation and how Discord was revealed in the finale to be Grogar the entire time. But when you look back on it about a year later, you might ask yourself, was the Discord twist the original plan? Or was Grogar legitimately supposed to be coming in the entire time? Well, let's talk about that. Now, the reason I bring up the fact that when you look back on it about a year later, and how a lot of us might find it hard to believe now that perhaps Discord's twist of him being Grogar the entire time was not maybe the original plan, but the fact that Grogar, the actual Grogar, being brought in as the final villain was, I think, has some, I guess you could say, has some evidence to it, if you will. Because when you go back and watch the first episode of season 9, and the moment Grogar is introduced, it almost feels like, even though he's voiced by John Delancey, because John also voiced Discord, you could tell in a sense that it's an entirely different character. John's voice is a little bit more gravelly for Grogar. The way he demonstrates his power. In the first episode of the final season, as well as in Frenemies and stuff. It makes you really curious and wonder if perhaps Grogar was intended to be the real, actual final villain, and not the Terrible Trio. I mean, I understand that, the Terrible Trio has a lot of familiarity with the main 7, the main 8, if you will, and they all have agendas with them. But when you really get down to it, from a storyline and continuity perspective, yes, they do have issues with them, but the Terrible Trio, or when it first started, the Terrible Foursome, all had agendas with different individual characters, if not groups. For example, Sombra shouldn't have just had a problem with Twilight and her friends, but mainly his issue with taking back the Crystal Empire should have just been with Cadence and Spike. But they decided to add Spike into the mind-controlled creatures and ponies that were being mind-controlled and brainwashed, if you will, by Sombra. They decided to add him to that, instead of having him be like one of the main characters that Sombra would want to go after, along with Cadence. So from a continuity standpoint, yeah, Sombra joining in makes sense, but his agenda would have been more towards getting revenge and, not only taking over or retaking over the Crystal Empire, but getting revenge on Spike and Cadence. That would have made more sense. When you look at Cozy Glow's issue shouldn't just be with Twilight, but her issue should be with the Student 6, since a season prior, they're the ones that caused her to lose the chance of becoming the Empress of Friendship. You look at Chrysalis, of course, that's the one thing I think they kind of got correct. They did correctly, I think, and that's have her focus on Starlight. So that's the one thing they did do correctly, because they knew a lot of people wanted to see that fight anyway. But then you take a look at Tyrek, and Tyrek was kind of similar to Chrysalis. His main issue was Twilight and her friends. And I honestly believe, in my opinion, guys, my honest opinion, is if they would have gone the direction I think they were planning to go with, with Grogar not only being revealed as the legitimate final villain, but him kind of like bringing these villains together and then maybe addressing who they really want to have revenge on and kind of helping them out so that they may help him out later on, as well as at the same time try to plan a coup over him and fail, I think honestly was probably, in my opinion, one of the plans, or one of the legitimate plans that they had in place for the final season. However, when it comes to why they changed things up, I think I know when and where that happened. And I'll get to that in a moment, but the point that I'm getting at is I think when you take a look at everything that happened in that first episode and several episodes in the first half of the final season, it almost gives off the fact that yes, Grogar was supposed to legitimately be the final villain, but then something happened. And what was that? Well, let's talk about it. So, what I think happened that made the creative staff change their mind to go with the Discord twist occurred when they finished up the scripts for both Frenemies and the mid-season 9 finale Between Dark and Dawn. You see, I think it was Frenemies that really motivated them, or kind of gave them the idea of probably going with the terrible trio, the Legion of Doom, over Grogar as the legitimate villain. Even though when they were writing Frenemies, Grogar was still, in my opinion, penciled in to be the last threat that Twilight and her friends would overcome. But it's because of the way that the script for Frenemies wrote the villains and how they retrieved Grogar's bell that they decided, you know what? Let's make the terrible trio the main villains because of their familiarity with our protagonist, but also because of the fact that, I guess they saw how they were written out or written and everything and thought, hey, this makes more sense than just having Grogar. Now, again, as I mentioned at the beginning, the creative staff has basically said that, Grogar was never really the original plan, that the original plan was the terrible trio. But as I mentioned, I think that's a bunch of BS. I think, honestly, the creative staff was going to go with Grogar, but when they wrote Frenemies, they decided, as they were working on Between Dark and Dawn, that, they would go in the direction of the terrible trio. I think when they finished the script for Frenemies, Grogar was still penciled in, but after they looked it over while working at the same time on the script for Between Dark and Dawn, that's when they decided, you know what, basically that's when between both episodes they were finishing up on the they were script writing on. That's when they decided, you know what, let's go with the terrible trio and do something different with Grogar, and that's where the Discord twist came into play, in my opinion. Because, like I said, why would you hype up this character from this one story appearance in Flurry of Emotions from season 7? Why would you hype him up from then and not follow through on it towards the finale of through the finale of the series? Why wouldn't you follow through on it? And again, my honest opinion is I think they wanted to follow through on it, but something came up, and I think what came up is they saw how well the terrible trio was written in the Frenemy script, that they decided to go with them instead of Grogar. Now here's the big question though. Would Grogar still work if they'd gone with the original plan, in my opinion? Because again, they can come out and say that Grogar was never meant to be the original final threat to Equestria, and it was always the terrible trio, which again I find hard to believe looking back on this a year later. So the other big question is, would Grogar have worked as the final threat to Equestria for Twilight and her friends? And my honest answer on that is yes, I really do. Because when you think about it, the creative staff comes out and says, oh, well, the new generation of fans wouldn't really, get behind this G1 supervillain coming out of nowhere and being the final threat. Well, what I'm trying to say is, wouldn't they have felt that same way back in season 4 when Tyrek was introduced? They didn't know about him, but through word of mouth of the fact that he was like the first threat that the ponies and Megan faced in the pilot special for G1 My Little Pony. They didn't know anything about him except for that. So what makes you think that they wouldn't have known who Grogar is, except for maybe word of mouth and maybe watching some of the classic G1 MLP? It doesn't make sense. So again, I know I say this a lot in this video, but my honest opinion, I think Grogar would have been the better choice. I'm not saying that what they went with wasn't a good choice. It was a good choice. But my honest opinion is I think Grogar would have worked just as well, if not a bit better. Because, again, the way you're hyping this character up as being the legitimate threat that he was and could have been, I think would have really worked. Because he's because basically the way things were working out, the way things were set, you know, set out, set down onto the foundation for the villains in the final season. Grogar basically was positioned as having everything planned out. Like, he knew exactly how to go against Twilight and her friends. And I think if they would have gone with Grogar as the final villain and him following through on that strategy plan that he had to use the same methods that Twilight and her friends used against, to save Equestria on numerous occasions against them, I think would have worked as well. Look, I understand some people are going to listen to this or watch this and be like, well, Brian, you're not making any sense. If the creative staff says it was not meant to be, it's not meant to be. Like I said before, though, the creative staff is known to not really want to say the entire truth. They're not going to come straight out and say, yeah, Grogar was the original plan, because it'll make them look, it'll make them look bad. It'll make them look terrible. Like, because basically what they're doing is they're not being fully true with the fan base, with the Brony and Pegasus fan base that has supported and made the show into the phenomenon it is today. So, so of course they're going to come out and say, no, the Terrible Trio was the original plan, not Grogar, to save face. They're not going to tell you that the original plans from the very start was for Grogar to be the villain, and then that would be like the ultimate test. Because again, why hype this character up a few seasons prior in a storybook and not follow through on it, if you know what I mean? So overall, my honest opinion is that I think it would have worked. I think it would have been a great story element. I think it would have been great story development, character developments, for both sides of the coin, for the villains and the heroes. I think it would have been great. I think it would have worked out well. I mean, you have a lot of people like Dr. Wolf and Golden Fox and Silver Quill and Lightning Bliss, all coming up with theories throughout the final season as to how Grogar could play a huge role, what his connection is with certain characters. And when you have fans like that coming out and theorizing, what role this character, this new villain, super villain has played or will play, then obviously you realize that they expect you to follow through on it and not for you to twist them and say, nope, that's not what's going to happen. This is what's going to happen instead. So again, I think, my honest opinion, my speculation is Grogar was meant to be the original villain, and again, I think it would have worked. I think he would have been just as big a threat, if not maybe more so, than the Terrible Trio combined. And in the end, you could still have, Twilight and, the rest of the main seven and the Pillars and the Student Six come together, hit the Rainbow Blast on Grogar, and, depower him to the point that when Celestia and Luna get back their power, they, along with Discord and maybe even Twilight and Starlight, use their power to petrify Grogar in stone along with the villains. So, again, I think it would have worked just as well. Again, you could still go the same route you did before with how the villains are defeated and everything, but I think it would have worked just as well. But again, like I said, the reason they didn't do it is because I believe, well, they were finalizing the script for Frenemies, and they were probably finalizing or finishing up or in the middle of the script for Between Dark and Dawn. That's when I think the decision was made to go with the Terrible Trio and not, Grogar himself. So those are just my honest opinions. Again, as I said at the beginning, I did this off the top of my head without a script. So I do apologize if I sounded like I rambled or went all over the place. I just wanted to get it off my chest as to why I think, in my honest opinion, Grogar was the legitimate plan, was the original plan, but they decided to go in the direction that they did with the Discord twist. But let me know what you guys think. Do you agree, I should say, with what I'm speculating on what I believe was the original idea for the finale? Or do you think maybe I'm just reading too much into it and that perhaps the Terrible Trio was indeed the original plan the entire time for the final threat to Equestria? Let me know what you guys think down below. Comment if you like, and I will talk to y'all later. God bless, take care, and stay safe.